Journey Together is making its English release soon at the end of March, and with it comes two huge meta shakeups for GLC. I already discussed one of them in my previous video about how to beat the new Whale Lord, and the other shakeup comes in the form of the new Hops Pokemon in Colorless. The other three owners in the set are nerfed pretty heavily without their signature EX Pokemon, but with Hop that's not really the case. Just 2 or 3 Hops Pokemon will have a huge impact on the speed and pacing of the Colorless type decks in GLC. Let's take a closer look at how this new archetype works in GLC and what players can do to prepare their decks for it. The 3 Pokemon that are relevant to Colorless decks in GLC are Snorlax, Cramorant, and Dubwool. Hops Snorlax gives a 30 damage boost to its own attacks and other Hops Pokemon, and with its boost it has a 170 damage attack for 3 energy, comparable to the infamous unfazed fat Snorlax. Oh, and important to mention, since Hops Snorlax has a different name, you can run it alongside the unfazed fat Snorlax without violating the singleton rule in GLC, so that's fun. The key to understanding what makes Hops Pokemon such a threat in GLC is their signature tool card, Hops Choice Band. This tool combines energy acceleration and damage boosting all in one, reducing the cost of Hops attacks by 1 energy while increasing their damage by 30. This card would be insanely broken if it wasn't limited to just a handful of Pokemon. But it's not like Snorlax and Cramorant are weak cards by GLC standards anyway. And there are 2 more trainer cards supporting the archetype as well. Postwick, a stadium that gives Hops Pokemon an additional 30 damage boost, and Hops Bag, which gets the Hops Pokemon into play, helpful as the Snorlax and Cramorant are too big to search out with Buddy Buddy Poffin or Fan Rotom. With a Hops Choice Band, this Snorlax can attack on turn 1, going second with a double colorless or twin energy for 200 damage. And with a Guzman Hollow Search, you get all the pieces you need to find the Snorlax and attack with it. And if you already have the Snorlax out, you can grab Postwick as well to hit for a massive 230 damage. The Cramorant attacks for 120 damage for 1 energy, only if the opponent has exactly 3 or 4 prizes remaining. You can make that cost 0 energy for 150 with the Choice Band, but really you don't even need it. If you have Postwick or Snorlax out on the bench, 150 damage for 1 energy on a basic Pokemon is one of the most efficient attackers in the format. And remember, this is based on how many prizes the opponent has. So Cramorant is totally able to take your 5th and 6th prize against a stumbling opponent. Together, Hops Snorlax and Cramorant give Turbo Colorless decks both a terrifying early game, but also a powerful and efficient way to keep taking prizes in the mid-game after the opponent establishes their board and starts to fight back. Turbo Colorless was already good at dominating the early game with unfazed Snorlax, but both Cramorant and Hops Snorlax offer the deck 2 new mid-game threats that, as basics, can be instantly deployed or redeployed with cards like Night Stretcher and Revive without needing to evolve, and they can take knockouts with just a single energy attachment or even less, making the Turbo Colorless deck now both frighteningly fast and frustratingly resilient. Dubwool is the cherry on top of this vanilla split, giving the Colorless player access to a non-supporter version of Boss's Orders. While Dubwool's single-use ability may not seem that impressive at first glance, the ability to boss up a key Pokemon from the bench while still being able to play a supporter effect in the same turn is well worth the deck space. Dubwool allows the Hops deck to maximize its early game disruption by targeting key Pokemon on the bench while still being able to play key setup supporters to enable those early attacks. Wooloo can be easily found by Buddy Buddy Poffin, Fan Rotom, or Hops Bag And with a boost from Hop Snorlax and Postwick, doubles 80 damage actually becomes a half decent 140 damage attack in its own right if it needs to be. All of this is on top of the crazy support that Colorless already has access to, including the type's 3 different double energy and powerful onboard draw and search options. I haven't mentioned yet that Snorlax does deal 80 recoil damage to itself, so with 150 HP, it can't attack twice without knocking itself out, and it can't use something like Protection Cube without giving up the Choice Band. However, there are easy ways to get around this drawback and allow the Hops player to extend their early game rampage. Penny and Acerola will return the Snorlax and the attached energy and Choice Band to hand, meaning they can then immediately replay the Snorlax, attach the energy and the Choice Band, and be attacking with it again instantly. Mallow and Lana accomplish the same thing, retreating it and healing 120 damage that it dealt to itself. And one of the craziest combos with this Snorlax that I don't see enough people talking about is Ninja Boy. If Hop Snorlax is still around after you attack with it once, you can replace it with another big basic from your deck that doesn't do recoil damage, while keeping the energy attached and preserving the Snorlax damage boosting ability for later to use with Cramorant. You can go with any of Colorless's big basics that hit for 3 energy, like Cyclizar or even the OG Snorlax itself, but I think my favorite target is actually Single Strike Tauros with the Raging Bull attack, which will do 180 damage with no additional energy investment for just 2 energy, and is a strong early game attacker in its own right, dealing 80 damage by default for just a single double colorless energy, which can knock out most evolving basic Pokemon. Hop's Choice Band arguably becomes a focal point of the deck. While you might think that the fact that you can only run 1 copy of the card in GLC would be a huge nerf to it, there are an abundance of ways in GLC to both find and recycle Pokemon tool cards. As already mentioned, Guzma and Hala will find every piece needed to get an early attack off, and can itself be searched out by Tag Call, and Arvin can find both the Choice Band and a helpful item like Hop's Bag. And for recycling the Choice Band for repeated uses, there's Eco Arm, Lana's Fishing Rod, Roseanne's Backup, and Silene. Lana's Fishing Rod also recycles a Pokemon for you as well, and if you have a draw engine in play like Bibarel or Squovit, Silene gives you a 75% chance to put the Choice Band immediately back into your hand by drawing it. Roseanne's Backup is probably the strongest recovery available, as it also recycles a Pokemon, a Stadium, and a Special Energy, getting back Postwick and a double colorless energy in addition to the Choice Band and a Pokemon. Adventure Bag and Town Store are great tool searchers, especially with Roseanne's Backup, as they can get the recycled tool immediately out of the deck without needing to use a supporter. In fact, Hop's Choice Band is so powerful, I believe that any game where it starts off prized will significantly decrease the Hops player's chances of winning, so Gladion is probably worth playing in a Hops colorless deck. So what can players do to try and get an edge, or at least survive against this new Hops colorless deck in GLC? Let's see if we can identify some weaknesses and possible tech options that can fight back against this deck. As I said, the Hops Choice Band is a big part of what makes Hops Pokemon so scary. And even though pretty much everyone is already running Field Blower to counter defensive tools, being an offensive tool makes reactive cards like Field Blower much less effective against it. In fact, not effective at all. And that's where a card like Tool Jammer comes in. And Tool Jammer isn't just some narrow answer just for the Choice Band. It can effectively give a greater damage boost than Muscle Band when used against defensive tools like Cape of Toughness, Pot Helmet, and Luxurious Cape, while also actually preventing damage against opponents' muscle bands and fighting Fury Belts, making it somewhat of a defensive tool in itself. But in addition to that, it shuts down pivot tools like Floatstone and U-Turn Board, and if played aggressively on turn 1, it will stop technical machine plays as well. I used to play Tooljammer in Dragon a lot, and slapping it on my Regidrago and having to stop opponents from searching their decks was hilarious to me. The main downside is that the Tooljammer wearer has to be in the active spot. So the Hops player can negate the effect if they can push your active Pokemon to the bench with Escape Rope, Dubwool, or Guzma, and of course they can counter it by discarding it with their own Field Blower. There's also the option of using Jamming Tower or Lysander Labs to block the Choice Band effect, but as those are stadiums, they are easily countered with another stadium. Same goes for the possible stadium-based counters like Temple of Sinnoh or Pokemon League Headquarters. And unfortunately, the only Pokemon that have abilities that negate tool cards are very bad and not really worth a bench slot. Probably one of the most effective answers to the Hops deck will come from the Lost Zone. One of the biggest strengths of the Hops deck is how easy it is for them to recur their best attackers and be attacking with them instantly. If you can Lost Zone their Cramorant with Lost City the first time you knock it out, you are likely throwing a huge wrench into their mid-game tempo. And the same goes for Lost Zoning either of their Snorlaxes, especially since Hops Snorlax is a dual threat as an attacker and a recurable damage booster. And just as well for the Hops Choice Band. Discarding it with Field Blower is pretty much meaningless, but if you can banish it to the Lost Zone with something like Lost Vacuum or Faba, you can cut off fast mid-game attacks in the future that would have come from recycling the Choice Band. And by the way, I feel Faba is just generally underplayed in decks that have on-board ways to search out supporters via abilities, as those decks are also great at using Palpad. Not only is Faba more powerful by permanently removing the targets, and more flexible by being able to target special energy, the fact that it's a supporter is less of a weakness and more of an opportunity to be able to easily recycle it from the discard pile. When you need to discard Field Blower in the early game to an Ultra Ball or Professor's Research, it feels terrible because you know you're not getting it back. But discarding Faba feels great because you know you can easily get it back from the discard pile with multiple cards in your deck. And finally, a more general way to withstand the Hops deck is to invest in more consistently developing your bench in the early game and having efficient basic attackers that can take response KOs early. Keep your main strategy as the focus of your deck and build your deck for consistency around that strategy so that you're up and running within the first few turns of the game. Don't think that you're going to get 4 to 5 turns of bumbling around in the early game against a toothless opponent looking for your core pieces. That's just not how GLC games are going to play out anymore. Alright, so that's it. Our deep dive on the Hops Pokemon Colorless for GLC and how to possibly beat it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Are the Hops Pokemon too strong for GLC? Or will they just set a new bar for the speed of the format? How are you going to be countering this deck? And if these cards are too strong, which card would you argue to be banned, if any? Thanks everybody for watching. These videos take a ton of time to write, record, and edit, and it looks like only about half of you that watched my previous Wailord video are subscribed to the channel. It helps out a ton when people subscribe, not financially, but by getting YouTube to suggest GLC content like mine to more people that might be interested. So thank you so much for hitting that subscribe button, and good luck in the Journey Together format.